uh, finding why the African guy need to have a change in the mindset, and why are we supposed to have that change. So if it's your first time that you join this conversation, my name is John Gora. You can follow us on Twitter, The Motivator KE. On Instagram, we are already there, One Talk Radio Podcast, and our website is www.onetalkradiopodcast.com. You can always be part of this conversation by sending us message, sending us tweet, or anything that can improve this kind of a conversation. So allow me to introduce or welcome Raphael Olande into this conversation so that we see what he has for us, and we can try, to uncover the African mindset. First of all, understanding the African mindset and understanding why we need to change from this kind of a mindset into the other. And this is explained very well by my friend Raphael Olande. So if you're just joining right now and you've never liked us on Facebook, like our page, our Facebook page, The Motivator. And also remember, we are on YouTube as One Talk Radio Podcast. You can always subscribe and always follow these conversations on Facebook. So allow me to introduce Raphael Olande.
Thank you so much, and I consider it a privilege to appear on this podcast. My name is Raphael, as he has mentioned. I'm born and raised in the village somewhere in Kenya. I'm a teacher by profession, and I do many other things. I love to call myself the African. I love to call myself a patriot. And maybe that is what brings us to the head of everything we are going to talk about. I talk so much about Africa because I love Africa. And one time I said that if you love Africa and you see how it is being mishandled, then you can never be at peace, even if you're in the North Pole or in the South Pole. So that's why we want to talk about this.
That's very interesting, Raphael, and I really appreciate how you are bringing it out. You are an African who love to speak about Africa, and in most of the conversations that we've had and most of the articles that you write on the Africa We Want, that is a Facebook page that you should be checking if you've not been checking that. That Raphael tries to, bring the change of mindset to the Africans by sharing most of the contents that we need to read, not the contents we want to read. The world today is all about what we want, but there are some few people who are outside there bringing to us what we need to read. So, Raphael, to start this conversation, there's this one article that brought Norway into a standstill that you wrote and appeared in the newspapers, and most of the medias have been discussing it for a while. What was your scope and what was your idea behind this article, Raphael?
Well, like I said, I was raised in the village, and in the village, everybody knows everybody. And when I went to Nairobi to hustle after my high school examinations, it was not so much different. At least we knew who was living next door. And there was the idea of belonging to a society. As much as people came from different ethnicities and different backgrounds, once you're in the city and you're in the middle of people, even with its busyness, you'd still feel you belong to these people, and you could easily take a good conversation with even a stranger. And then come to Norway, and my biggest shocker, I came here to do a program at a university here. And the first meetings, you get to know a few students and you talk, what's your name and such like. But then immediately you step out of the university doors, then you're like a stranger. You would love to greet them with being very jovial like an African in the street. But then it's like, what's going on here? It's as if you really don't know each other. And that replicated itself in many, many, many instances where if a social event put you together, you'd share warm conversations. But as soon as that was over, you were like a stranger. And that was not done to foreigners only. They do that to themselves. So there's a little bit of disconnect between human existence as a people together and an individual. So I think this society stresses so much the individual aspect of everything. So I had my own theory to it, and that is the economic system. And in Africa, for example, our welfare system has made it such that you'll always know you need your neighbor. If your animal strays into the next farm, you know who will stop it. It's the neighbor who will stop it. And very much including raising school fees. Sometimes most of us got fees from well-wishers, and it was easy to even raise money from just friends to do something. But that's not here because they are economically empowered, and to some extent they would think they don't need the neighbor. And it's a mirage because that's not true. It's only that the difference is the government has organized welfare so that it's a state function. So even if you don't know who contributed, the state takes care of it. So in Africa, it still demands that you really have to have a relationship and you have to keep it. To me, that is very important, even if we were to organize welfare system as a state function. So that is what I wrote, and I think a couple of people who grew up in the 70s and 80s, they loved this, and they said, we miss those days when somebody would just come by the door and ask you how you're doing. And so they loved it, and it was a big discussion. Within 2 weeks, it was read by at least 100,000 people. So it was shocking even to me.
That was really shocking, and it's a shock until today. And just like you had me say or talk about it, the first time I read it, and when you shared it, I was like, I wanted to go into it, but I was like, this is written in which kind of language? But then, sometimes we have the translated version of each and every document that you can get even in Google. So getting ourselves back to the content or the topic of today, you've talked about something that I want to quote, the Africanism, where people need, to be having some kind of people. You need to know someone, or you need to know specific people to make things done. And the other version where a society or a community gangs up to help or to assist a son of the soil or a sister of the soil to do something practically. So that gets us to our main topic today, the change of the African mindset and the need to build Africa for Africa and by Africans. And we are going to take Kenya as an example or as a reference in discussing this matter of how we have or we need to change our mindset. So the first question that I would like to put across to you, Raphael, do you believe that we as Africans, we have our history at hand? Do you believe that we have what it takes to define to a foreigner what our history reads?
Absolutely. First, I would love to give a clear indication here that most of the history we read is European history in Africa. And we are not so keen to tell African history. Every people have a history. We have our own history. As vast as Africa is, from the north in the Maghreb to the south with the Zulus, we have our own history. With the Kenyan, and we look at the neighboring Uganda, we have the Ugandan kingdom. It didn't start yesterday, neither was it started by colonialists. It has always been there. If you go to Mali, we had one of the greatest kingdoms there. You talk of Shongai. If you go down to Tanzania, even during the Arab settlement there, we have a good island there that was the headquarters of the Sultanate. So we have a lot of rich history that defines just us and who we are. And right now I'm supposed to read, my next book is the 5,000 years history of Africa. It goes that deep. Of course, part of it is oral, but that's just how it is, including Egypt before invasion by the Persians. So we have a rich history that just tells who we are, not the European experience in Africa.
That's a great one, and it's a very important answer to take note of. We have got history, and this history, the problem is that we are getting to learn this kind of history in books, not written by us, but books written by other people who, I would say most part of it, or a good percentage of their rights, are writings that are, influenced by what they want, their own interest, you know.
Thank you for raising that. You know, I want to give a clear example. When Ludwig Kraft came to Kenya, he even
Yes.
lost his wife there because of a missionary program he was following up. And when the missionary society told him, can you just come back because you even lost your wife? He was presenting what he read about Africa, that this is a very ripe continent for evangelism. So everything he was writing, it was so much about their own interest. This is what you have about Africa. Instead of coming back, you guys send more troops to come here, send more people to come here. So they were writing what was beneficial for their own existence in Africa or for the colonial interests. So that's just how it is. They can't come here to start writing what is good for you. They just come to write what is good for their existence there. And it's just natural. I'm not blaming them for that. If we invaded Europe, we would do the same.
That's most definitely. And now to take you back into understanding, you know, a mindset. You know, we are talking about African having a change in the mindset, and most of us, or a good percentage of the population in Africa today, would be asking you, what is a mindset after all? Because you know, these are words that have been borrowed. We paid for these terms, or to understand these terms. So there are those who haven't, you know, paid for them, but still would go to the library and come out without understanding what all these words means. So what is your definition of different types of a mindset, Raphael?
So first, a mindset, the grammatical part, or if we just go into the meaning part, is what is your worldview? How do you interpret what goes on in your environment? Now that's a mindset, or what informs the decisions or the conclusions you make about things happening around you. Now that is a mindset. So for example, if somebody thinks, I don't have enough education, I don't deserve a better thing, it's a mindset. What is informing that? He thinks maybe because of education, you have to live well because you are educated, or you don't deserve to live well because you're not educated. Now that's a mindset. So when we talk about mindset and we come down to Africa, my interest is what we interpret as Africans and what I want us to see as Africans. So for example, we'll talk about many areas that an African need to have a different mindset. And first and foremost is the love or the self-love of Africans. I would say without a doubt that Africans don't really love themselves. We hate ourselves and we treat ourselves worse off than somebody else can do. And Marcus Garvey said, the greatest weapon in the hand of an oppressor is the mind of the oppressed. Think about that. So, by the gun, I normally say that the Europeans, they managed to colonize us because they had a superior weapon, and that was the gun. Take that away, and they were not going anywhere. So they, by some means, managed to conquer us. But how have we managed after they have left? Now we are oppressing our own so much than we are being oppressed from outside. I'll give very clear examples. If you go to apply for a passport, and then you are dealing with the two different nationalities, let's say a German national is looking for something at the immigration office and you're right there. I promise you, they will give a lot of attention to the German and not you. Now, that is just how it is. Now, look at how the police is dealing with us. Instead of looking for ways of making you obey the law, they want to put you in more trouble so that you get punished. That's just how we are operating. Look at how the leaders are leading the country. Instead of building the country for everyone, they don't care. Even if floods are killing us, even if epidemics are killing us, they don't care as long as things are working for them. Now, who else will treat us better if we are not treating ourselves right? So that's a mindset. We have to love ourselves. Another mindset we have to change is the angel from outside. We think that somehow somebody is going to come from outside, think about Africa, and put it on a good platform for development. I can say without a doubt that is not going to happen. If there's an individual outside Africa that thinks well about Africa, his capacity will be so limited. But if it is a government, there's no free lunch. You have to know they will always come with strings attached. So thinking that we will wait for somebody from outside who will think and come up with policies, and so that Africa gets out of the woods, as much as there may be, but that is not the best avenue. We have to think of Africa that it is us who will build for ourselves. It is us who must be on the front line. Another part of change that we must accept as mindset is, well, this may be a small subsection, but this, for example, is women, for example, where that we have what is called male antagonism instead of women empowerment. So we have to change that. So on one side, they would say what a man can do, a woman can do better. And look at the burden they still leave on the shoulder of a man. So it's not working. So we have to be clear on such kind of stuff. We have to change how we relate with one another. We have to know that a fellow Africa is much, much more important. Much, much, much more important. So we have to change our mindset. Yeah.
Wow, that's profound. That's profound, Raphael. And I agree with you. The change of mindset is a need and not a want. And the most difficult part of this kind of mindset is the belief that we've grown knowing that, yesterday I was talking to some group of people, and I was talking about a prophet that is not accepted in his own hometown. And I was talking about the gift that you are given by God. We tend to think that something that's going to come from outside will make your life more better than what is in you. And that's why people are chasing education, chasing money, chasing wealthy kind of lifestyle, and forgetting some of the gifts that you are given inside you, within you, just, cultivating it and, trying to improve and develop these kind of talents, because we have so many people around outside there who are doing even better than the kind of guys who are chasing these other outside resources to make it.
There is something that is we have to make clear also. All civilizations interact. So today a British is writing, but he's not writing using letters they themselves invented. Today somebody is doing mathematics in the USA, but they did not invent those numerals. So it is interaction of civilizations. What I don't like is the underdog mentality. So I want you to go to study in England, not because you are an underdog. I want you to go there because you think by interacting in England, you may have a different view that is going to build what you already have. Not to say we have nothing, we have just to learn from them. That is not true, especially when there is clear evidence that the civilizations we admire have also borrowed things from outside. So that is how it has always been. So what I don't like is an underdog mentality that, you know what, we don't have it. We don't have what it takes. We have to rely just on them. It is them. Now, that is what I don't like. But as for the interaction, now we are speaking English. It's their language. But guess what? They also borrowed it from somewhere. So that's just normal. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great, Raphael. So to put it in a simple way, do you think that a mindset, can we classify a mindset as a resource in matters development, Raphael?
The greatest resource, not just a resource. Every good idea. If you walk into a city, you live in Bahrain. If you walk around Manama and you see beautiful houses, where did they start? It started in the mind. If you walk and see a very beautiful ship somewhere in the middle of the ocean, where did that start? It started in the mind. If somebody was going to wage a war, it starts in the mind. Tomorrow there's a big fight. It's all about the mind. I don't know, I mentioned about the war. I like following boxing, and Andy Ruiz is going to meet AJ, so. So it's all in the mind. So every war is waged first in the mind. So the mind is the biggest resource that we can talk about.
That's exactly true, and I also support and agree with you on that, Raphael. I just want to understand. There's a lot of belief in Africa that and it's a talk of the day. The whites and even the Africa themselves will always be boasting, and bragging of potential. We have the potential, we have resources, we have all it takes to be a powerful or a powerhouse of each and of the economy worldwide. But the question is, after more than 50 years of independence, this story still continues. And I know even the generation that will come after this generation will still be told how potentials are available. What is making us not to cultivate this potential? What is making us not to talk about it, but start seeing the potentials, happening across the world?
To rule somebody, you have to make them feel inferior. You cannot rule anyone until you make them feel they need you. That's just the law of nature. And so if Arabs came and they wanted to control Africa, they had to tell you that, you know what, you are inferior, you have to obey. And that is what every colonial settler did. They had to tell us how inferior you are, you're not at par with us, so you have to obey our rules. That's just how it works. But the problem is this conditioning, we've refused to take it away, because when our fathers that fought for independence took over, I love the words of one of the greatest politicians of all time, that is Tom Mboya. He said at the beginning that the trust we had when we were uniting to fight the colonial man, we must not breach that trust, because when we breach the trust, we will never take off as a nation. But that is what happened in many countries in Africa, because those who took over the leadership from the whites, they inherited the mechanisms that were in place to help the colonial man exploit Africa. But when they discovered the exploitation this time could give them gain, they did not want to tamper with it. So the same framework of things has remained. That's why in Kenya, for example, when the white settlers were having good farms and every lucrative sector of the economy, the first people, that is what they took. So it was not an exchange that the colonial man has left so that this thing goes to the common man. So we've inherited these systems and we've created an elite society, very much like the white minority were. Now we have our own black minority that are ruling so much and they're controlling a lot of wealth at the expense of everyone else. So that's our problem. So this is a ripple effect, such when it has not worked in the economic sense and it is not working in the political sense, now it spills over in the social sense. So we think like, okay, so-and-so must be having it better. Our countries are damaged. We can only get a better life elsewhere. But that is not true.
Wow. That's not true. And I agree with you, that's not true. We can always make it from within, and we can always, just take what is needed and what it takes to improve our social life, economical life, and all that. But the truth is that Africa, is getting to its knees. In as much as we will be keeping quiet or silent on it, there are so many things that we must accept or come out and speak about. And that is what now takes me into talking about the African economy and talking about the leadership in Africa. And partly, when I started these conversations, I was trying to make people understand that leadership is not just being in position, but leadership starts with you. You are a leader on your own, and you're a leader on your own capacity. And positions are given to some other people amongst us to show us the way and, to give us a check. They are like prefects. Their work is to observe how we are leading each other. But then why is this economy falling where we have great leaders who are educated? We have great leaders who've got potentials and have got skills and a lot of experience in dealing with issues that would improve economy rather than, putting it down into the knees. What is the youth, the African youth, doing towards, making sure that this economy works out, Raphael?
Before I even talk about the youth, you have to realize if you're given a mathematical equation and you use the wrong formula, even if you are the professor, you're going to fail. And that's just it. So our economy is failing, not because our leaders are incapable, but the formula is wrong. In other words, it is systemic. So whatever calculations you are going to make, it's still coming up to a knot. It's not going to give you the right answer. Our economy is so much designed such that as long as the elite get enough to sustain their good life, they don't care what else goes on elsewhere. And I love one writer, he's called Robinson. I think he's written with somebody else, and he said, the economies can be designed such that they are extractive. In other words, everything that is being run by the government is to the extent that it supports the existence of the elite ruling class. So as long as things are working well with them, they won't care. And who are these people that are making policies? They live in Nairobi, for example. They don't know what is happening in Pokot. So recently we were seeing in Pokot, for example, when young children as little as 12 years confessing to have killed 3 people using gun, and somebody is seated in Nairobi, and they really don't know what goes on in Pokot. As long as Nairobi is working for them, that's fine for them. As long as when he wants to move around, some police will come ahead and clear the road. He doesn't know what it takes to travel along our own roads. As long as he's capable of taking their children to live in Massachusetts or somewhere far away, they don't care if there's crime in Nairobi. So our elite, the ruling class, as long as things are working for them, just to a little bit, they don't care improving any other thing. So that goes in all other sectors of the economy. And there's what is called a destructive change. A destructive change is where somebody shall always lose in this kind of change. So Africa needs this kind of a destructive change, and the elite will never love it. I want to give you an example. When Kenya government wanted to build the railway from Mombasa to Nairobi, it has implications. Somebody is going to gain a lot of money out of it. As long as this is working for the elite, they will always accept it. And why would they go for an expensive loan if there's an alternative? It is because this is going to destroy a source of income they're going to have. Now, think of it. What if the economy was working for everybody? In Kenya, for example, think of it that you would call a rally on a Tuesday and nobody attends because people are busy at work. Some political elite wouldn't love that as much as they would give a lip service. They don't love it because this is now their power base is going on. Think of our own country in Mount Kenya. What if running for a political office did not require that you have to be in good books with Uhuru Kenyatta, for example? Now that is, we have to break that. In other words, by the time we are abandoning that kind of system, it is so destructive and some people have to pay the price, but we need it. So coming to the youths, our youths are doing a good job, but the system is not supportive. The environment is not supportive. I'll give you an example. If you go to Nairobi today to apply for a license to start a business, somebody is going to ask you for many, many things. One of them is goodwill. Now, from my understanding, goodwill is supposed to be if you're inheriting a business or you're buying a business and you are riding on what good the business has built before. But think of it, the location is strategic, so you're going to pay rent because of that, but somebody is going to charge you goodwill, which is illegal, but you have to pay. Now, if you had little money to do it, where do you go and get goodwill? They're not asking you small money, they're asking real big monies. So they're suffocated. Even if you're trying to do something good to stand on your own, you're suffocated. A very bad example I'll give you is if you open a shop to sell, you open a small eatery to sell food, and one of the things they want you is to have a fire extinguisher, and they tax you for having a fire extinguisher. Instead of taxing those who have not, or giving fines for those who don't have fire extinguishers, they are taxing you for having a fire extinguisher. Now, if you put a banner, you opened a business, you paid the license and you paid for the name of the business. But if you put a banner right on your doorpost, not outside, then you still have to pay for that because they consider that an advertisement. Now, how many taxes are those? On one individual, if you had 100,000 Kenya shillings to start something, you can see where a big chunk goes. As much as our youths are trying so much, we are suffocated. Our youths are suffocated, but they are really hardworking.
This is very interesting, Raphael. And I've hosted a lot of people and a lot of I'll call personalities, but this is the first time I've seen or heard a youth talk positively on what the youth is putting in our economies back home, back at home. And it reminds me as well also, and it now enlightens me on how hard it is to be a youth at this particular hour of the day. And it's categorically, or I would put it, which position do you think we are in today as a youth now that everything is tight? The economy is not friendly to us, and it's not only the economy, because everything is friendly, but the capacities in which we are being put to run this kind of development and improvement of our life is becoming much more difficult than even the mind itself. The thoughts, you can think of having a business, you can think of putting something outside there to improve your life, but then the requirements becomes even more than the cost of creating that kind of an idea. So I would ask a simple question, which you have also answered, but I would like you to go into details. How and do you think the African youth is taking chances in betterment of themselves as well as the economy? And are they ready for it? Are they ready for this challenge? Or do you see the Kenyan or the African youth as a lazy person, if I may put it in the simplest term possible?
I wouldn't think of a Kenyan youth as a lazy person, especially because I have what to compare it to. Like I said, the system is not giving opportunities. Now, let me tell you this. Governments are not supposed to give people jobs. The government's job is to create an enabling environment so that you can do your business. And if somebody comes and invests, that is how jobs are created. The private sector creates jobs, individuals create jobs. Of course, government has some jobs, but the government cannot employ everybody. So what we need is to create an enabling environment. I'll give you another example. Today, as we speak, we are depending on electricity. You're using lights, you're using everything. Now, think of my country where power blackout is a very common thing. So how many businesses can you run that don't depend on power, for example? So if we have this right, it shall be fine. Think of doing the food industry, for example, where much of it, storage is a factor and value addition is a factor. But a young man has started, he's growing avocado. If he doesn't transport this to the market in time, it's a waste. If he doesn't know how to add value, it's a waste. So something like access to credit facility. So that is what we have to do. And think of a young man. Recently, there was a debate about whether young men should pay the loan they're given to study or not. Logically thinking, they should pay. But what are the circumstances under which they are paying? If you you take a loan and you are not getting a job, the government should not be punishing you for not having a job. Because what they're doing now is to say, okay, we gave you a loan, give it back. And the kind of fines they're charging tells you that this is a punishing thing. It beats the logic. It turns the logic on its head. So what can the youths do? I think we have to demand these things from the government. That is the only part now that remains, that we have to demand these things from the government. And it starts from the electoral part. For example, with the local administrations coming from the members of county assemblies, the members of parliament, and the governors, and all the way to the national government. We have to demand these services from the government. We have to demand good roads. We have to demand facilities that will enable us to do our businesses well. But again, another thing is if we get a chance to represent, for example, a young man elected in a position. Now, these are the people who should champion for the young men in the society. So sometimes it's so unfortunate if you see a young man, he's there and he's just now busy eating and he's voiceless. We have to get the mentality that I'm here to represent my generation. So we must stop what in the Bible somebody called it Hezekiah syndrome. Hezekiah was a guy in the Bible, and he was told one time by a prophet that he's going to die, and because God is going to send some punishment on him. And then he pleaded so much with God. Then God added him 15 more years and told him, these things are going to come, but after you are dead. And he said, thank God these things are going to happen when I'm dead. Now we must stop that kind of mentality that as long as you've gotten into a position, now you don't care. For example, if you reach, we normally say the middle class, you've gone to school, you've studied something, ICT, business or whatever, and now you're having some good income. But now when we are telling you to champion for the right of youths, you think of, okay, this is going to destabilize me. You are saying, after all, it does not affect me. So the fact that if things don't affect you, you don't want to talk about them, that is where we have to change also. So the young men placed somewhere, whether in diaspora, whether in the workplaces, we have to speak for the place of the young man in Kenya.
That's a good one, Raphael, and that answers the next question that I wanted to ask you, but I would still ask it so that we get into details about this, Raphael. We are a people, and people speaks for the people, and without this, we don't have power. Because if I keep silent that things are good on my side and I don't care about my brother tomorrow, I will need them. So we've got to speak for each other. We should stop speaking at each other, because this is what is happening in most of the African countries. You get a group of, Utamaki speaking at a group of Jatelo, and it has made it makes the environment very fragile, and we are people that should be living as brothers and sisters. So the next question that I wanted to understand, or I wanted to put across into you, was what and why do we have to take this time to speak about matters that are affecting Africans, and yet we are not there?
Very good question, and that is so dear to me. I want to tell you something. 300 years or more since they started exporting slaves to America, they are still called African Americans. Now listen, even if you are a professor in the University of Chicago or the Ivy League, the respect you have partly depends on your background. And that's just it. In other words, if Africa is in a mess and you think you're living in London, the mess of Africa follows you all the way to London. That's just how it is. The respect given to you mostly depends on where you come from. Forget about the wealth, forget about your education, forget about everything. Your background, what is your history? Who are you? Now, let's stop pretending. I normally say I don't believe in equality. Not because it's a bad thing, but I just believe it does not exist. Equality does not exist. But forgive me for being politically incorrect. But this is just it. If you're an African and you've come to London, for example, and you say, I come from Kenya, the first question somebody is likely to ask you, are you one of those that runs? Why? It's a legacy. If you come from, because recently there was Eliud Kipchoge, so they think sometimes that every Kenyan runs. But as it is for that good thing, if there's too much theft and corruption in Kenya, so they think like, oh, this must be coming from one of those countries Trump calls something I don't want to mention. But that's just it. However much you are well placed, you could even be having a bungalow in Paris. Get out on the street, when they see an African, the first thing that comes to them is the stereotype of what Africa looks like. That's why if Africa is good, it's home and away. It's good for you at home, it's good for you away. If it is bad, it's home and away. If Africa is bad, floods is killing people, diseases and epidemics and all that, if you get out and you're looking so smart and in your tie and speaking academically, forget it. You come from Africa, and the first thing that comes to them about Africa is those epidemics, the Ebola. Sneeze and say, I come from an Ebola-stricken area, the first thing they think is that you have Ebola. That's it. And think about another aspect to it is dependency. If Africa is suffering because the economy is bad, it means one person who gets his neck above has to support many, many people that stay below. Now, I speak this from experience, and it is the experience of many, that if you have 1,000 shillings above everyone else, if there's a fundraiser, they will call you. If somebody lacks school fee, they call you. If somebody needs new shoes, they'll call you. So wouldn't it have been better if everybody was lifted up so that they didn't need to depend on you, for example? Now you're struggling probably in Bahrain and nobody knows what you're going through to make a living. But wouldn't it have been better if people home didn't depend on you? So that's why you can't bury your head in the sand and say, after all, things are working well for me. Now I don't care. You have to care for Africa. That's how deep it is.
It's absolutely deep, as you put it, Raphael. And I believe and trust and also support that because, when I started this podcast, the biggest challenge was why and who will be interested, into speaking up for the African voice or speaking up for a boy child or speaking up for a girl child, because my mission and vision with this podcast was just to, help people understand that there is no difference or bridge or a gap in between me and you or the third person. The only thing that is creating that difference is the looks from the eyes. That is what has made us, be what we are today, because we tend to look things so much by our eyes and not the mind, or not, giving it a second thought and seeing something coming out of it in a better way. So we cannot just talk today, Raphael, without touching something in the political wave that we have back in our country today. And the biggest thing, or the biggest discussion right now, is about the BBI. And I would like to bring it into this conversation and try to ask you, what have you seen? Because according to me, I've not read it, because I won't lie that I went into reading the BBI part of it. But out of what has been said outside there, what is outside in circulation, I've seen more political part of the BBI than the economical or something that I would call development part of the BBI. And I've seen youths being consumed as well with the political side of the BBI, and not taking discussion and conversation on how the BBI itself will be as something that is going to improve the well-being of a common a man inside this beautiful country, Raphael.
Well, this is a tricky thing, especially in my country where politics seems to be, for breakfast, lunch, and supper, we seem to eat, drink, and sleep politics. But I'll be as candid as I can. Now, BBI as a report is a good report. I would say so. But it's not lost on me that there's what is called preparation. I want to give you an example. When George Bush wanted to invade Iraq, he had decided he's going to invade Iraq, okay? But he couldn't just do it. He has to prepare the ground and prepare the public and prepare everybody else why it is a very important thing to invade Iraq. So what he was looking for is the public support for a decision he had decided long time ago. And that's how I read politics everywhere. I don't just buy the surface sellout, like, okay, this is a good thing, we have to do this, we have to do the other. I have to ask myself, what is going on at the background? Now, at this level, I want to say this. All the recommendations of a BBI, as they were proposed in the document, these are functions of a government. So if a government is functioning, a government ought to have done what the BBI has proposed. Full stop. If it has not done so, it's a question of why has the government not done so? And you can see that this one eliminates the aspect of executive changes the changes of whether we should have a PM or whether we should have a female deputy governor. Now that's a very small part to the BBI. The main content of BBI, the bits I've read, they are basically functions of a government. So if Uhuru has been in government for 7 years and the country is in the state that is described, the thing is, why? So we should be asking why. And perhaps out of this, somebody should make a good manifesto. The reason I'm talking like this is because somebody is so much keen on a referendum. And I'll tell you, I'm not a political scientist, so don't call me an analyst. But I'll tell you this, the BBI is supposed to create a momentum towards 2022 elections. So it tells you who is playing at the background. These are people who are interested in the political power in 2022. There is only one thing the public can do. What the public can do is to take over and steer the BBI. It's a very tough thing. I don't know whether that happens. I don't know the probability. But that is the only way it can end up saving. Otherwise, the princes have met. By this, I refer to Raila and Uhuru. Nobody knows what they discussed behind the scenes. They've come up with what they want the public to believe they discussed, out of which Kenyans have used 10 billion to get a BBI report. Somehow we need to go further and further. Not bad, but it looks to me, I'm a little skeptical. So allow me to be in the position of a skeptic. But despite the good reports of the BBI, these are functions of a government, and a functioning government ought to have done them. And two, allow me to be suspicious that somebody is bent on using BBI to gauge the field for 2022.
Wow, that was a wonderful talk there that we've had, Raphael. And I think a normal person and an intellectual who knows how to analyze word by word and can read what we have discussed here will believe and agree with me that it's the greatest talk that we've had on One Talk Radio podcast and discussing matters, the change of mindset in Africa. So just to, wrap up all that we have discussed, Raphael, I always have that time to, we call it a free talk. That is why it is called One Talk Radio podcast. So this is a one talk. It's a space and a few seconds for you to, sum up and wrap up our conversation. I don't want to do it. I allow my guests to wrap and sum up all that we have discussed. That piece of message that you have for an African living outside there, how can we build Africa for Africa and by the Africans?
Yeah, in a summary, I would say that what we need to do is to build an Africa that works for the Africans, with the interests of Africans, not a small minority at heart. By that, we should dare to think of truly what is inclusive. If BBI is talking about inclusivity, it has nothing to do with the tribal face, but it's a society that everybody feels included. BBI talks of, or not BBI I say, but people talking about a tribal face and to show inclusivity. That does not include the normal man. That will include political aspirants. So we have to aim to build a society that is working for everybody. If we want to build schools, let us build schools that are working for everybody. Not that some people are learning under a tree and other people are going abroad to study. That is not fair. We let us build things that work for everybody. If it is hospital, I'm longing for a day our president will be in a local hospital for a very serious disease. Well, I'm not hoping for a disease on our president, but that is what I wish, that the elite shall also be using our local hospitals, and the public shall be as good as private. Because if we give the private sector only the chance, then it's like we have we've sold the people as pawns for political or for private profits. That is not good. So Africa built to serve the bigger majority of Africans and the bigger majority of the living population in Kenya. That is what we are looking for, not what works for Uhuru Kenyatta or Raila Odinga. That's not what should be.
Well said there. Well said there, Raphael. And I really believe that this is the most important thing that we needed to talk about, just to understand how the change of mindset is needed in Africa. And I still believe that we've still got chances to bring things back into where they're supposed to be. All is not lost. It is said that a real warrior will always not quit. They rest, they relax, and they come back charged into doing things the way they are supposed to be doing. It was great having you, Raphael, and I thank you so much for taking this time humbly to be with us here on One Talk Radio podcast, and hoping for more of the same in some few days to come as we continue talking privately, so that we can organize and create space for such kind of discussions to bring back the African that we want, because it is our time. If we don't do it today, the generation that will come after us will blame us for not, playing or laying down the red carpet for them to walk through. So we should not blame the generation that passed. We should straighten things right now. So, what is your parting shot, Raphael, before I close?
Thank you so much for having me on the show. And I would just say that we should believe in our potential. It's not coming from outside. Let's look inside and build a better Kenya, a better Africa.
Thank you so much, Raphael. Thank you so much. And do have a great moment. Do have a great time. I hope that you pass my regards to your family. And we hope to host you here in the next coming days to exchange the experience and the great wisdom that you have for our people. This is African, built by the African, for the Africans. It's always possible because of you. It's always possible because of you staying there and supporting us by watching it, by sharing it, by liking it, and also commenting and correcting those things that we need to put into consideration to make this podcast a great show. So I'm looking forward to hosting a lot of guys from outside and also from within, so that we can make Africa a great place to be. You and me make the great part of this One Talk radio podcast. So, as I finish this conversation, thank you, Raphael, for being with us. And I also wish to thank all of you that watched this conversation. And I ask you to follow us on Twitter, The Motivator KE, Instagram. We are already there, One Talk Radio Podcast. Our website is www